In connection with the 60th anniversary of the Point Association, we are conducting a series of oral history interviews. And my name is John Ward, and I'm here with Robert Foley, who is the Director of Preservation for the Newport Restoration Foundation. It's August 18th, 2015, and we're sitting here in the library at Harbor House at 111 Washington Street in Newport, Rhode Island. Mr. Foley, who's had a long and distinguished career in the area of historic restoration here in Newport, but our focus with him today is going to be on an organization known as Operation Clapboard, which was founded back in the 1960s by a group of concerned citizens who feared that in the wake of urban development, many of Newport's colonial buildings were being lost or in peril of being lost. Mr. Foley, can you tell me first off, how did you end up in the field of historic preservation?
I studied early New England architecture in college, and that's a little college in Marlborough, Vermont, where if you were good and passed basic courses, you could spend the last 2 years specializing in something, and that's what I specialized in. And went all over New England looking at 18th century houses and different things like that, and writing a paper and doing drawings and photographs.
How did you end up here in Newport?
One of my classmates was Tom Benson, and he was actually a year behind me, even though he was several years older than I was. He went in the Navy and various other things. I graduated and then was teaching school in Dover, Vermont, and living in a house in Marlborough. And Tom came down in April or May to the house, and he said, "Hey, well, let me go back to the work at Marlborough. I came down, amongst all the other places I went to, I came down to Newport several times with Tom to look at 18th century houses and take pictures, and most of them weren't restored, so it was very interesting compared to going into primarily house museums. And Tom, of course, knew everyone in the Point, and we would walk along the street and open a door of an apartment or rooming house, and he'd say, "Look at this stairway," and someone would yell, "Who's down there? Where are you going?" And he'd say, "It's Tom Benson." "Oh, how's your mother?" Stuff. So we looked at these things, and they were really ragged. And then one Saturday we were walking down the street again. He said, "You got to go in this house." Knocked on the door, and it was 25 Bridge Street, and we looked at the paneled room on the right and the actually paneled room on the left that was just flaking paint, ceiling, floor, walls, everything, and the hallway. And the people who lived there had several kids and had some illnesses and conditions, and sort of a sad story. But we left and went across the street. We were standing in the the billboard lot.
Oh.
And I said to Tom, "If that house is ever for sale, let me know." So along April or May, he stopped in and he said, "You got to come down and buy that house. It's for sale. The people have left." And I had been married not a year, or, well, a year and a half, I guess it was. And I had a job in Boston for the summer. So I said, "Look, let me get out of here and go to Boston, and then I'll come down." And so we did, and almost immediately bought the house with the lot that came with it. And then, of course, Tom being Tom, in a week or so he called up in Boston and said, "For $400 you can have that house next door and put it on your lot."
Oh, wow.
So we did. And,
What was the neighborhood like when you first went in there? One hears a lot of stories about the old days.
that area right in from the railroad tracks to the Thames Street was fairly interesting. There was a family, 3 generations, that lived on the west side of us, and they had the house in the backyard that we moved. And then there was the Simon house, there was a landlocked house behind it, and another one. The small house was empty, although filled with furniture and stuff. People just died, and some relative in Worcester would come down once a year and look at it. The other one was inhabited by Edna, the dog lady, who had, no one knew how many dogs she had in the house. And that was another isolated, there are 2 isolated houses from any road. It was a driveway. And then the Addisons had been there for a long while. And Esther Bates had restored a house, the Claggett house across the street. And the rest of the houses were basically apartments in Buddy Walker's auto body shop,
Where was the auto body shop?
where Lisa Lewis has her, and those garden shops.
Oh, that was about the 911 Bridge Street.
Yeah. Yeah,
The neighborhood has changed.
yeah.
So, what actually prompted the creation of Operation Clapboard?
I'm not actually sure. It was Tom Benson and a woman named Nadine Pepys, and a few locals. There was Pat Kirby in real estate, and a couple of other people, and they just saw the point at a transition period. The Navy was in the process of reducing and changing itself, and that had been what kept a lot of houses going and inhabited. And what was happening was that the owners of those properties, from probably the First World War up through the early 60s, could rent anything under the sun. And if someone came along and looked and saw, fleas or rats or whatever, and objected and wanted them gone, the landlords would say, okay, find another place, there's someone behind you. And they didn't do anything to the houses. And in those early 60s, there were a number of houses condemned, so they weren't used. The King's Arms Tavern was one. It had been boarded up for a number of years.
Which is on Cross Street.
Yeah, because it was so... That was one idea, and of course the other idea was all of the 18th century houses needed to be restored or should be restored to maintain the point feeling and so forth. So they started what they called Operation Clapboard, and the simple way of it was to find people who find houses that were for sale or could be bought, and in some cases to secure them they took a 60 or 90 day option to buy and put very little houses were going for $4,000 or $5,000 even back then. The Peter Simon house went for $12,000 with the vacant lot next door to it.
Wow. Just for this is about 1964, is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. From that, they would basically Tom and Nadine and Pat Kirby as a real estate agent would look for friends or people they knew or something and say, come down to Newport and buy an 18th century house and store it. And I'm not sure, even looking back, how they brought people together, because there were a number of several people from the Boston area that did 18th century houses, and then we had probably 3 or 4 families, couples that bought houses who were New York City artists.
So it sounds like various circles of acquaintances or friends.
Yeah, and a lot of them didn't want, or a number of them weren't too interested in the necessary 18th century houses. They wanted something just simple and serve their needs. And I remember one house on 2nd Street, I think between Walnut and the next one. It just looks like a gable roof house. But he took the 2nd floor and we reinforced the flooring and put braces in and poured not cement but a lightweight, I don't know what it was, over the floor. Looked like cement, and that was his studio because he did very big paintings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's been changed now, but we put a big long door in the gable end so that the canvases could go out.
This is a little off the track, but I'm curious the way you're speaking. There seemed to be a lot more artistic activity on the point back then than there is today.
Probably, yeah. You see, it was also, it was very inexpensive to buy, particularly for people coming from Boston or New York or whatever. So it was very attractive. And even with the Peter Simon house, my wife had a trust fund, and we had determined we were going to buy the house. And so she called up the trust agent in Chicago and went through it, and he was asking questions, and she said to me, "You've got to talk to him. I don't know what he's talking about." So I got on the phone and explained something about the house, and he said, that's all fine, but do you really want to live in a house that only costs $12,000? And of course, he was used to the North Shore of Chicago.
Right, exactly.
So, it attracted people who it allowed them to have a second home because of the very low prices. And
well, I imagine you had to be sort of courageous too to take on some of these properties.
Yeah, I mean, some of the neighborhoods were more difficult than others, and in terms of people still in large apartment houses. And then you still had a Navy presence, which on the weekend they would make quite a bit of noise going from Thames Street downtown, out Third
To the base,
to
right.
the base. Yeah.
Let me ask you something about what was the criteria for selecting the houses? Was it I assume it's a combination of availability and historic value.
Yeah, that in particular, and people. Some of the houses that Operation Clapboard got, they weren't apartments, but it was off once or twice an older couple who had lived there all their lives, done whatever. One I remember had been a Newport policeman, and they wanted to move to a nursing home or something. So the house was for sale, and Claverton found out, and that one actually a woman from the Detroit area bought as a second home.
So Operation Clapboard would find that house, for instance, of the older couple, and they would take the option on the house.
Yeah.
And then they would scurry around and find what they thought would be a suitable tenant who would be interested, and then would then restore the house.
Yeah.
And would Operation Clapboard then, would they be involved in the restoration with them in any way? Would they?
Well, they were helpful. Tom knew a lot about 18th century buildings and the houses in the point. And one of the things that I did in relation to working on the Peter Simon house and moving the other one, I worked with a contractor, and he seemed to have very good carpenters and so forth, and got the lion's share of people from Claverton hiring a contractor to do the house over
So
at whatever level.
You would lead them to who? People
Well,
that-
and then I would draw up plans for the people if they wanted, and basically hire me on an hourly basis to draw and supervise, because they would often be back in New York or back in Boston and wanted to know what was going on. So, sort of a clerk of the works architect.
Almost like a general contractor, or you're overseeing the whole
Yeah.
project.
For $20 an hour, which was good money.
Yeah. I'm sure it was. Did Operation Clapboard help out any of these prospective buyers financially, or?
No, there were connections with a couple of banks, and that was another thing this trust officer said to us from Chicago. Okay, you can buy the house for $12,000 and whatever, and I can send you a check and that's it. But he said what you really should do is go to a local bank and get a mortgage and take some cash for a down payment. And he said, I will send the bank a cover letter saying we guarantee the mortgage. And that was very simple, because he said, if you're gonna live there, establish
Right.
yourself. And I think that's what a number of people who moved in did as well. Was some of them didn't have to worry too much about money, but there were a lot of things where they became part of the community and a group, and Claverton would meet. I don't know how often, not too often, but they were organized with Nadine and Tom as co-directors, and then there was sort of a board, the lawyer, the real estate person. I think I was on the board probably because I was the first person to buy a house. They needed whatever, and they incorporated as a stock corporation or business, not a nonprofit. And what they did was they sold shares, and some of it they never had a whole lot of money, but I think in part 2 or 3 people that Nadine Pepe's knew put in $2,000 or $3,000 apiece, and a friend of Tom's put in a nice chunk. So they never had more than $7,000 or $8,000 in the bank, and Tom was getting paid $2,500 a year. So they went along, and that was their kitty in putting money, buying a option on the house for limited days, and those were usually in the amount of $150 or $200, unless it was a big or a major house or something.
Now, how did what ultimately happened to the organization of Operation Clapboard?
Well, there was a split, and it was between Operation Clapboard and Tom Benson, or some of the people in Clapboard. Tom had been pushing for a non-profit arm because a friend of his was friends with one of the DuPonts, and he could get this person to donate $5,000 or $6,000 to a non-profit, so he had a tax break that would be Tom's salary. Well, the powers that be at Claverton didn't want to do that, and I don't know, words were crossed, and Tom was fired or Tom quit, whatever, and Claverton went on, and he went on to found Newport, which was the non-profit, and did supply him with a salary.
Oh, that's interesting. Can I just ask something else that's a little bit off the track? Do you think that this was the inspiration for Doris Duke with the creation of NRF?
In part, yes. I think she was an acquaintance to Catherine Warren of the Preservation Society as well. And all I know is that before NRF was announced, the little house that I moved and restored rented to a fellow named Glenn Sauls, who started the first 2-3 years of the music festival that is in the Mansions, classic opera.
The Newport Music Festival.
Newport
right.
Music Festival, yeah. And he and his partner used to entertain a lot over there, to have people come over for drinks and make a donation to this thing. And several times Doris Duke was there, and one time he came over and he said, "I've got Doris Duke, and she wants to see the inside of your house. She likes my house," except it was mine. So she came over and came in the back door and said hello, and then sort of walked around on her own. We didn't know what to do, and my parents were down for a few days, and they were up in a guest bedroom. They didn't want to interfere with this, so they're sitting, waiting to go out to dinner with us in this bedroom in a chair, and my stepfather on the bed, and she comes up and looks in the door and says hello, and then goes over to him.
So that was the first time you met her?
Yeah, I would hardly say meet her.
Saw her, or
Saw her.
had
yes.
contact with her.
Yeah, but the point is she had seen Glenn Saul's house that I had restored. She wanted to see the large house, the Peter Simon house. And I think she knew of other people that had restored houses